Imagine Jerusalem in the early 1st century, a vibrant city under Roman rule and deeply rooted in Jewish tradition. At its heart, the great temple gleams with golden stones in the sun, a symbol of faith and authority. Here, laws could not be questioned, and traditions were defended with relentless fervor. Amid this fraught scene stood Caiaphas, the high priest, a powerful figure at a time of intense transformation. Caiaphas was not just a spiritual leader, he was a gatekeeper of stability in a volatile world. As the high priest, he navigated the delicate balance between Roman authority and Jewish autonomy. Any disruption to the fragile peace could invite catastrophe. So, when a preacher named Jesus of Nazareth began attracting followers with his radical teachings, Caiaphas saw danger. This Jesus, many claimed, worked miracles. He healed the sick, spoke of love and forgiveness, and, most controversially, called himself the Son of God. To his followers, he was the Messiah. To him, he was a threat, a challenge to the traditions that held his people together, and an instigator who could provoke the wrath of Rome. His teachings undermined the authority of the temple, drawing people away from the rituals and laws that Caiaphas had sworn to protect. By the time of Jesus' trial, the tension in Jerusalem was palpable. Crowds had gathered for the Passover, and the city was bursting with visitors and whispers of rebellion. Jesus' growing influence had transcended from a mere religious concern to a political liability. Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin feared that if Rome saw this preacher as a revolutionary, the empire would retaliate against all of Jerusalem. It was under this immense pressure that Caiaphas made a decision he believed was necessary to save his people. He presided over the trial, accusing Jesus of blasphemy and sedition. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, received the support of the Sanhedrin and handed Jesus over for execution. Caiaphas had acted swiftly, decisively, and with what he believed to be the best interests of his nation in mind. 3 days after the crucifixion, Jerusalem was again ablaze with rumors, this time of an empty tomb. The soldiers who had guarded the site claimed to have witnessed a supernatural event. While some spoke of angels and others of a blinding light, they all agreed on one thing: the body of Jesus had vanished. For him, this was unthinkable. The man he had condemned as a false teacher was now at the center of claims of resurrection. The very people who had followed Jesus in life now proclaimed him alive in spirit and body. If these rumors spread unchecked, the fragile order Caiaphas had tried to preserve could collapse. Historians have unearthed 2 key accounts, both written by him. The first was a formal defense of his actions. He laid out his reasons for condemning Jesus: the preservation of Jewish law, the prevention of unrest, and the safeguarding of the temple. To Caiaphas, Jesus represented a departure from the traditions handed down from Moses, a path he believed led to chaos. The second account, however, is strikingly different. Rumors began to circulate after the resurrection, revealing a man grappling with doubt. Caiaphas describes sleepless nights and an overwhelming sense of unease. He interrogated Jesus' followers and even confronted his own priests, but their testimonies only deepened his fear. The year is approximately 33 CE. Tensions in Jerusalem are at their peak as the city teems with Jewish pilgrims preparing for Passover. There, he was a man whose role demanded the delicate balancing of 2 immense powers: Roman rule and Jewish tradition. To preserve stability, Caiaphas found himself walking a perilous tightrope, torn between his loyalty to centuries of faith and the rising threat of revolution sparked by a single man: Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus was not the first to claim divine authority, but his influence was unique. His teachings were spreading rapidly among the masses, challenging not only the social order, but the very foundation of Jewish faith. He called himself the Son of God, performed miracles that drew crowds by the thousands, and spoke of a kingdom of heaven that defied earthly power. Caiaphas held one of the most politically sensitive positions in Jerusalem. In his role as a high priest, he assumed responsibility for the temple, which served as the spiritual center of Jewish life and the dwelling place of God among his people. The temple was not just a religious institution, it was a political symbol of Jewish identity under Roman occupation. King Herod had rebuilt it with grandeur, symbolizing resilience and unity. Caiaphas knew that if anything threatened the sanctity of the temple, it could lead to an existential crisis for his people. However, the authority was not absolute. Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, granted him his position, which he could revoke at any time. The Romans allowed Jewish leaders a degree of autonomy, but only as long as they maintained order and kept the people in line. Romans would brutally retaliate to any hint of rebellion, particularly during a major festival like Passover. Caiaphas' mind was filled with the shadow of past revolts, including Judas of Galilee's uprising in 6 CE. The stakes were unimaginably high. What made Jesus particularly dangerous to Caiaphas was his open criticism of the temple itself. He overturned the tables of money changers, accusing the priests of turning the holy space into a den of thieves. Matthew 21:13. He spoke of a new way of worship, one that did not depend on the temple's rituals or the priesthood. This was heresy of the highest order. To Caiaphas, Jesus wasn't just undermining the religious authority of the temple. He was also weakening the delicate social fabric that held the Jewish people together under Roman oppression. Worse still, the temple's financial base began to erode due to Jesus' growing following. By preaching a direct connection to God that bypassed priests, Jesus encouraged his followers to ignore traditional sacrifices and tithes. For him, who relied on these contributions to sustain the temple and its priests, this was not just a spiritual challenge, but also an existential threat. The trial of Jesus took place in the shadow of these fears. According to historical accounts and the Gospels, he convened a meeting of the Sanhedrin, the council of Jewish leaders, to address the crisis. The accusations against Jesus were clear: blasphemy for claiming to be the Son of God, and sedition for his perceived challenge to Roman authority as King of the Jews. He famously stated, "It is better for one man to die for the people than for the whole nation to perish." John 11:50. This wasn't a rash statement, it was a cold calculation. Caiaphas understood the danger Jesus posed, not just to Jewish tradition, but to the tenuous peace with Rome. If the Jesus movement sparked an uprising during Passover, it would invite a violent crackdown. By condemning Jesus to death, Caiaphas believed he was acting to preserve the greater good. Yet, behind his public decisions lay personal turmoil. He was not immune to doubt. His testimony reveals the immense pressure he felt, knowing that his actions would have profound consequences. He saw himself as a protector of God's covenant, yet he couldn't ignore the growing whispers that Jesus might be more than a man. Fear gripped him, not just of the Romans or of losing his position, but also of having condemned someone who might truly be God's messenger. In his second testimony, he admitted to sleepless nights, haunted by the possibility that he had made a grave mistake. Reports from the soldiers at the tomb and the unwavering conviction of Jesus' followers magnified his doubts. What set Jesus apart from other teachers and prophets, however, were his claims of divinity. He spoke of God not as a distant, untouchable force, but as a Father with whom he shared an intimate connection. Jesus declared, "I and the Father are one." John 10:30, a statement that to Caiaphas and the Sanhedrin was both shocking and blasphemous. This was not merely a theological debate, it was an existential crisis for Jewish leaders. For centuries, Jewish monotheism had been defined by the belief in one indivisible God. The Shema, the central declaration of Jewish faith, states, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one." Deuteronomy 6:4. By claiming divinity, Jesus appeared to challenge this foundational belief. To him, this was heresy of the highest order, an affront to the laws given to Moses and a direct violation of the covenant between God and his people. Jesus' unique nature as a man who lived among the people yet claimed divine authority created a paradox that was difficult for Caiaphas to reconcile. On one hand, Jesus showed all the hallmarks of humanity. He grew tired, expressed sorrow, and even wept, John 11:35. These human traits made him relatable and approachable to the masses, who saw in him a reflection of their own struggles. On the other hand, Jesus performed acts that defied natural explanation. Healing the sick, calming storms, and even raising the dead placed him beyond the realm of ordinary human experience. These miracles gave weight to his claims of divinity, challenging his assertion that Jesus was merely a man. The combination of these two facets, human vulnerability and divine power, was profoundly unsettling. Jerusalem during the time of Jesus was a city deeply divided. Under its outward religious unity, fractures had already formed between different sects, classes, and beliefs. The arrival of Jesus of Nazareth, with his revolutionary teachings and growing following, only served to deepen these divides, setting the stage for cultural and social upheaval. At one end were the wealthy and powerful, including the Sadducees, priests and aristocrats who controlled the temple and its rituals. They relied on Roman support to maintain order and secure their privileges, tying their authority to their collaboration with the Roman occupiers. At the other end of the spectrum were the ordinary people, fishermen, farmers, artisans, and laborers. This group faced heavy taxation, social exclusion, and constant pressure from Roman rule. For them, Jesus' message of hope, forgiveness, and direct access to God provided a sense of empowerment. His disregard for traditional hierarchies made him a hero to the oppressed, while his miracles and parables gave them a new perspective on life and faith. This stark division between the elite and the masses created fertile ground for social tension. As Jesus gained popularity among the common people, the ruling class, including him and the Sanhedrin, began to perceive him as a threat. The temple, the centerpiece of Jewish life, was both a unifying symbol and a source of division. People offered sacrifices there, lifted their prayers, and celebrated festivals there. However, it also served as a place of seclusion. Priests had exclusive access to the temple's inner sanctum, and temple authorities heavily regulated its outer courts. Caiaphas and the ruling elite saw this as an attack on their authority foundation. The temple was not just a religious institution, it was the center of economic and political power. To undermine it was to threaten the foundation of Jewish society as they knew it. This divide was not just theological, it was deeply personal. For the elite, Jesus was a dangerous heretic who threatened their way of life. For the masses, he was a liberator who offered hope in a time of despair. The result was a society increasingly split along lines of class, faith, and power. Adding to the tension was the ever-present shadow of Roman rule. The empire governed Judea with an iron fist, relying on local leaders like Caiaphas to maintain order. The empire swiftly and brutally suppressed any sign of rebellion or unrest. The execution of Jesus did not heal the divisions in Jerusalem, it only deepened them. His followers, galvanized by the belief in his resurrection, grew in number and influence, further challenging the established order. Meanwhile, the temple continued to be a source of tension, ultimately destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE during the Jewish-Roman War. Despite Caiaphas' desire to maintain unity, his decision to condemn Jesus had the opposite effect. Instead of protecting the Jewish community, it amplified the divisions that had already begun to take root. His story serves as a reminder of how fear of change can lead to decisions that worsen the very problems they seek to solve. The social division in Jerusalem during Jesus' time was not just a backdrop to his story, it was a defining feature. It reveals the fragile balance of power, faith, and identity that shaped the decisions of figures like Caiaphas. If you are enjoying this story, consider clicking the Super Thanks button. By contributing, you're helping us continue unearthing profound stories, bringing fresh perspectives, and creating impactful content that informs and inspires. The split between the ruling elite and the common people, between the temple authorities and Jesus' followers, was more than a historical moment. It was the beginning of a transformation that would ripple through history, reshaping faith and society for centuries to come. The story of Caiaphas and Jesus is a timeless narrative of power, faith, and human frailty. Driven by his duty to preserve tradition and avoid Roman retaliation, he condemned Jesus as a threat to the temple and Jewish identity. However, his decision to maintain stability unintentionally facilitated the dissemination of Jesus' transformative message, thereby reshaping history. A profound paradox marks his legacy. His actions, intended to silence Jesus, amplified his teachings of love, forgiveness, and hope, sparking a movement that transcended time and culture. Despite his efforts, doubt haunted Caiaphas as reports of Jesus' resurrection challenged his beliefs, leaving him to grapple with the possibility of having condemned a divine figure. This story serves as a powerful reflection on leadership, fear, and change. It forces us to confront how we respond to transformative ideas and reminds us that even our most well-intentioned actions can have unexpected consequences. His role in history is both tragic and profound. By resisting change, he inadvertently became part of the movement he sought to extinguish. The truth, as his story reveals, has a way of breaking through, transforming lives and the world. Thanks for watching. Be part of our community by subscribing to this channel. See you in the next video.